I was in a relationship, an 8-year, very toxic relationship, broke it off, but then got together, had to call the police on him a couple times, like that kind of vibe. And I worked hard to keep that relationship afloat. I was the one holding the emotional weight. I was the one asking for dates every weekend that never happened. And here's what nobody talks about love, is that love is not all you need. Like I love the Beatles, but love is not all you need. What I decided and I figured out through my healing and my journey is willingness is all that we need.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Flip Your Mindset. I'm your host, Stacey Urick, and today's guest is Lilli Bewley. I'm so excited for this conversation. This is the first time I've ever had a dating expert on, but if it's on my website and it's on my podcast, it's all about a twist. So let me just give you a quick little bio on Lilli. She's a dating coach for finding love with over 10 years of experience in personal development. She herself went from surviving in life to thriving in love and purpose. Currently, she's helping single and successful women love dating and find their true love. I have like 6 people for you right now.
Let's go.
Lilli's on a mission to educate people on how dating can be fun again. But what I love about Lilli, and this is why she's on the podcast, is her approach is trauma informed. So think about this. Her help, her advice, her coaching on dating, on finding the right partner, on finding love in your life is done through a trauma-informed lens. It includes polyvagal theory, it includes internal family systems, and attachment theory. Guys, this is all that I do. Mm-hmm. So when I found out that this was Lilli's unique method, I was like, oh my God, we're going to jam out. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So excited to have you. So you're a dating coach through a trauma-informed lens, let's say. Tell me about that. Why did you create something like that?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for this conversation. I know it's going to be a blast. So, and I can geek out for hours about all the methods. I'm definitely a practitioner and a healer at heart. It's one of my gifts, I think. But so, a lot of what I teach is the process and the journey that I've been through, which I feel like for me is the most impactful with being on podcasts, but also having clients. And one of the reasons that I focus on dating is pretty specific. And that the reason is this. Well, number one, I think all of my core values for years and years and years have always been that I'm loving, caring, and kind. I have a big heart. I've always had a big heart, from when I was born. But through the traumas that I went through in my life, through society, through all these different kind of filters that I went through my life, is I found myself at this like breaking point in my life, which was like, I had, the 6-figure job, I had the house, I had the car, I had the boyfriend. On the outside, I had all of the things stacked and in place that my parents told me that I should be happy. Society told me, I had the body, all the things. But I was like literally dying inside, spiritually, mentally, physically, in a relationship that was, very unhealthy and toxic, very traumatic. And I kind of hit this breaking point where I was just so sick and tired of being trying to work so hard to be happy, and it just didn't make sense. It didn't feel right. I always, say that like God kind of tapped me on the shoulder and was like, there's something better. There's something better. I just didn't know what it was. I didn't have a model. I just didn't know. I didn't know anything about self-help, anything like that. It was all just in my life, do, which I was really good at doing, very achievement oriented, very like seeking validation, but it was just unfulfilling and I felt unfulfilled. The reason specifically that I focus on dating, and I want people to hear this, is that I was in a relationship, an 8-year, very toxic relationship, broke it off, but then got together, had to call the police on him a couple times, like that kind of vibe. And I worked hard to keep that relationship afloat. I was the one holding the emotional weight. I was the one asking for dates every weekend that never happened. I was the one trying different communication styles as I grew and I developed as a person. And here's what nobody talks about love, is that love is not all you need. Like I love the Beatles, but love is not all you need. What I decided and I figured out through my healing and my journey is willingness is all that we need. So willingness from myself and the other person to learn, to grow, to be able to communicate, to be able to figure out what's wrong with them, why they're not being able to take out the trash when you ask or whatever, like whatever fucked up thing it is. So instead of trying to polish a turd, one of my coaches said that, why not focus on the very beginning of the process of picking the right person? Right. I hear a lot, I have a bad picker. It's not that you have a bad picker. It's that a part of you, and we'll probably go into this, but a part of you that is wounded is actually running your dating relationships and your relationships, right?
Yeah.
So why not start from the beginning? Why
I
not
love
know
this.
from the beginning? Yeah.
So I love what you just said, and this is where we're going to dive in, right? So I want people to hear this. Lilli said very clearly, and I know intentionally, that there's a part of the person that is looking for the love, right? Or there's a part of the person, and this really comes down to this concept. It's parts work. It's labeled internal family systems. It's a therapeutic model that's been around for 40 years. It was developed by a guy named Dick Schwartz. And it's this idea that as we grow up, when we're first born, we have this self-energy, right? So anybody thinks about when they've ever seen a baby that's newborn, it's just a little tiny ball of energy and love and light, like encapsulated in saggy skin. I mean, that's really all that it is, right? They have no prejudgments. They have no opinions. They have just started observing the world as it is. And they have just a handful of needs, just like we all do when we're born. Keep me fed, keep me hydrated, keep me safe from the elements, make sure I'm clean, right? So hit these primal needs. But equally as important, if not more important, is I need to know I belong here. Not that I'm going to fit in, but that I absolutely belong. Because one of the things that makes us incredibly unique as humans is we are hardwired for connection. So if there's any indicator, whether it's intentional or not, by the caregiver or the person that's responsible for this child, if they get an indication that they don't belong or that they have to adjust in order to be a part of the larger group, then they're going to develop a different part to do that. Because that self-energy can only be a handful of things, guys. There's very unique qualities, right? Calm, confident, creative, connected, courageous. I'll drop off a few. I don't remember them all off the top of my head. But there's a set of qualities that allows us to just be. And just being is enough. But as soon as we get the interpretation or we make the decision that I myself, as I am, is not enough to get this connection, I'm going to shapeshift just ever so slightly to try to get it. And if it works, it's like cause and effect. Stick, right? So now we start to develop this part, and these parts can look like a caretaking part, a perfectionist part, a people pleaser part. You know, it could even be a set of parts that are like an inner critic or a negative self-talk to keep you kind of small. I'm giving you super high level here, but it is often that part that is seeking the connection. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So tell me how you utilize that and polyvagal theory, which we'll talk about because I think the two are very, very intertwined, to help coach someone, and attachment theory too. I really want you to talk about these things in detail because we know what they are, but the listener may not. Why are those things important?
Yeah. Well, first, and thanks for that explanation on parts. That was beautiful. The first thing about parts, I want to say two important things before we kind of get into that about parts. And this is, the way that I interpret that, the way that I deal, I use this work with myself and with my clients is if you like specifically about dating And most women that I know that are probably listening to this podcast have done a ton of work on themselves, have succeeded at, like, just like me, have succeeded in other, quote unquote, succeeded in other areas of their life, but the relationship piece is just like a shit show. The idea of like knowing what you should be doing or how you should be, quote unquote, how you should be thinking, trying to change your mindset about dating, trying to like say affirmations in the mirror. And what ends up happening is you start to see these patterns in your life, especially in relationship, and you start to think that you're crazy. So I just want to say, like, if what that should be happening in your life isn't happening in actuality, it could be just your parts, and you're not crazy because of this great framework that Stacey and I both know about, which is internal family systems. The parts inside of you were formed for a purpose. Every part has a purpose. The part of you that may be running different aspects of your dating life. Like I had a part of me, and you can use whatever term that you want. You can use a shadow feminine. You can use whatever term. It doesn't matter. But I had a part of me that was really, really good at being attractive to men and getting sex. I post, I post sometimes I repost it, but I have a post that I post on Instagram. I slept with 2 men in one day. And really all that was a part of me wanting to fill up the part that felt unloved, that didn't belong, like Stacey said. And I said that I could deal with it, emotionally. And I kind of like shut myself off all because that part was leading my life. Right. So all I want to say about that is that you are not crazy. You're not crazy when you catch feelings. You're not crazy when you say one thing, but do another. Right. It's really just a part of you that is like, in my terms, just screaming for healing. Mm-hmm. The second thing I want to say about this is that when we talk about parts work like this, like Stacey said, we're talking high level. And the worst thing that you can do if you notice that a part of you is leading your dating life that you don't like, please, and I say this with integrity about what I do, and I'm sure Stacey does as well, please do not push that part away, shame it, push it down, make it wrong, because that is only going to re-traumatize inside of yourself the same trauma that you have experienced in your life.
So I want, yes, first of all.
Yeah.
But I understand that because I study parts work and I coach through parts lens, right? Mm-hmm. So for the average person where they've never heard about this, I feel like we got to like slow it down and bring it to like the super basics. So you said something that is a truth, but it's not going to necessarily make sense to someone that's never heard about this concept. So you said, when you know that a part is leading, don't shut it up, basically, right? So there's two things I really want to focus on here, because people are going to be like, well, how the fuck do I know if a part is leading? Because people don't understand that they're separate, their soul energy or their essence or their core or their self, whatever you want to call it, is sometimes enmeshed, but often there's some space between that and the part. Okay. So they don't know that they are not the part. So again, this can get confusing, guys, but I want to go back to these C qualities. You know, when you're being self-led, when you feel calm and confident and courageous and connected and compassionate and creative. Okay. That's when you know. That's when we're in it. We all just inherently call it flow, right? Oh, I'm in my flow. Oh, I feel so authentic today. Like that's the truth, because that is your source energy. That is yourself. Anytime you're not feeling those ways, it's an indicator to you that you're not being self-led. That's the terminology. You're not in self-leadership. You're not being self-led. That means that the self, if you think of your world as a car, you're not the one in the driving seat. You're either in the passenger seat, in the back seat, or you're in the trunk.
In the trunk.
Right? You got a whole bunch of other parts partying it out inside the car.
That's right.
So part of doing this kind of work with Lilli or myself or anybody else that's trained in this modality is learning how to map out your parts. Learning about how to start to identify that there is a part that is leading that is not self. Mm-hmm. And to Lilli's point, what is it trying to do for me? It's really important to understand. There's a great book on this called No Bad Parts. All parts are benevolent. Okay. So they all think that they are your ride or die. They all think that they are your BFF, these different parts, and they're going to fucking fight it out to have primary spot. So sometimes you even hear that internal critic and that internal conflict of a part of me wants to do this, but then there's this other part of me that wants to do that. How often, as a listener, have you said that to yourself? There's a part of me that really wants to stop dating this way, but then there's a part of me that's like, but it's what I know and it's kind of comfortable and it's familiar, and why change it? And I don't even really know how to change it. And maybe that wouldn't even work out. So that,
Or I hear a lot, sorry to interrupt. I hear a lot, or let's just see, let's just test it out. Yeah. If you are like me, you can't just test it out and see. You can't, because you're going to end up in an 8-year relationship with a shitty person. And, it's just, I don't know. It just goes there. Sorry to interrupt you. I just got excited.
No. I mean, this is the conversation, right? So the other thing to understand, and you're going to hear us use this terminology throughout this episode and perhaps another one, is polyvagal theory. It's a big word. You don't really need to know what it means. It's an indicator that, again, you're not centered in that calm, right? So understanding at this very high level that we're all made up of a lot of parts, and our self is included, but sometimes it's smaller and quieter and meeker because these other parts have learned how to run the show, and it's felt good to have that support, even though you don't realize it's happening. How does polyvagal theory, what is it in your description, and how does that play into this as well?
Okay, thank you for that. So if every part has a purpose, one of the main concerns that I had, and a lot of women have, I feel like these days, is this idea of being detached from their intuition, right? When you are in self energy, all of those beautiful C words, compassion, courageous, connected is definitely mine. Like, that's my number one for sure. When you are in that state, you are able to make decisions for yourself in a self-honoring way. People always say, it was revolutionary 20 years ago when people said, you just got to love yourself in order for people to love you. And that was great then. But today, self-love has become transactional. And what I've learned about self-love is that it's not even about what you do with yourself. It's about the boundaries that you create within yourself and with others, the energetic, the physical, all of the boundaries, that's a whole other conversation. It's about who you choose to invest in your life, whether that with energy, with money, with time, with job, even, right? But self-love to me are actions and behaviors that fulfill your expression, that fulfill your purpose, that fulfill your enhancement in life. And when we kind of get to this point where we're in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, especially as it relates to relationships, we've been through the shitty relationships, we've been through the shitty divorces, we've done work on ourselves, and we want better for ourselves, but our behaviors and actions cannot catch up to what we think and we know in our mind. And that has a lot to do with what's happening inside ourself, right? Like if we're going back to the self energy and the different parts. And the connection with the polyvagal theory, basically, without, again, we could do a whole episode on this, it's super, super deep. But essentially what top level is the vagus nerve inside your body. And it's blowing up right now, which is amazing. And I also want to say, within the integrity of the work that I do, I'm sure with Stacey as well, is that just knowing about polyvagal theory is not going to change your nervous system state. There's no tool, there's no strategy, there's no hack to actually get you in a calm, connected place unless you elect into a deeper level healing, an extended, in my opinion, deeper level healing if you're seeing things that you want to change in your life. I regress, but the polyvagal fits into all of this because there are actually things, if each part of you has a purpose And the part of you that maybe you're just learning about in this conversation, maybe you've worked with in therapy or coaching before, the part of you that's leading your dating life or different aspects of your dating life is actually informed by your nervous system and your body, right? So if, for example, I can't tell you how many women, and this is kind of, if you know about attachment styles, this is kind of where this comes in as well. If you identify as having an anxious attachment, then you're really, really familiar with overwhelm and anxiety, overthinking in the dating process. And without knowing what's happening below the neck, which is essentially in your body, then we as women are going to continue to be detached from our intuition. We're going to continue to make the decisions that aren't fulfilling and uplifting for us in our growth and development. So learning about what's happening in your body and why is where the intersection in my work of polyvagal and internal family systems, where it comes into play.
So, and actually, I'm actually back in school. I've been back in school since August. We're recording this in November, and this program goes to the very end of January, beginning of February. And it's a live training that I'm in every week. And the certification is parts work through a polyvagal lens.
Oh, cool.
Right.
That's
so,
awesome.
which I just love because, really one is not separate from the other, right? They are very intertwined. I want people to understand, because we are like throwing so many high level terms around that, it's important to realize that it's okay to feel a little frustrated right now and feel a little overwhelmed, because we are talking about dating in a way that people do not. But if you've been going to a therapist or you've been going to somebody that doesn't understand or is not trained in internal family systems or is not trained in polyvagal, side note, that's not a part of traditional, a curriculum. This is not going to be a part of a curriculum for a psychology degree or a social work degree or a psychiatrist's degree.
Yep.
Okay. That they would have to have interest in and go and get separate training in. So it's really important to understand trauma, hard for me to say, trauma, polyvagal theory, internal family systems, all of this stuff that seems to be so common sense is actually not a part of traditional degree-bearing training, right? It's stuff you have to go back out. What I love about internal family systems, and I think this is really where I'd like part of this conversation to go, is an integral part to internal family systems is a term called exile. I tend not to use that term because for the average person, the layman person, I just want to give them something that they're going to understand. So I just call it a wound, an emotional wound, right? So all of these parts, the parts that we've just been describing, are protective in a way that they know you have this emotional wound. They've seen you have it, and they probably came into existence in your system because you were struggling. And their job, again, as your ride or die, your BFF, is to make sure you don't feel that pain. So when I'm working with someone, this is, again, fundamental. And perhaps maybe they're coming to me struggling in a relationship, but often it's not a relationship that's like a dating relationship. It might be a relationship with a family member or coworker or their friends or self, right? Or it could be a relationship with a spouse, a partner, what have you. One of the things that's really important to understand is what are they bringing into the relationship? What is their past lived experience? And what kind of wound did that experience create? Often what I hear from people, and I work under hypnosis a lot of the time. So I do a lot of my parts work under hypnosis. So I do direct access directly with the part, which is like magical and mystical and amazing to watch. And it's amazing for my client to experience, but I can't count how many times before we start to do hypnosis, and I'll usually do a few sessions consciously with someone before we even get to that point. What they want to work on is this fear of not being enough, a fear of abandonment, or a fear of rejection. Okay. And that is very universal. I'm finding very global. There have been a handful of experiences, perhaps in someone's life, that Connection felt threatened. Being enough didn't feel like it was working. Nothing felt like it was enough. Parents making decisions that are not in the best interest of the child. And so therefore the child feels less important, insignificant, unseen, unheard. And by the way, 90% of the time, not really intentional on the parents' part, but they have their own fucking shit that they haven't worked through, right? So they don't know how to parent. They're limited. We as children assume they've read the encyclopedia on how to parent. We assume that they know how to meet our needs. We're not talking about necessarily acts of violence, aggression, or abuse, though it could occur. But more times than not, I'm working with people that have these gaping emotional wounds that never were receiving any kind of abuse, aggression, or acts of violence. But there was this nuance of either inability to parent well or dysfunction or parents that don't know how to connect, which just simply left the child feeling because I'm not worthy of it. Okay, so understanding that high level, if a part's job is to prevent you from getting that wound touched, then if you find yourself in a relationship where you constantly prioritize your partner over yourself, where you're constantly making sure that they're happy, when you're constantly trying to make sure everything's perfect, when you're constantly people pleasing and not setting boundaries, because the underlying fear is if I do, I'll end up alone, or if I do, they won't be happy with me and therefore, or if I do, I'm going to be abandoned, which by the way is not the conscious thought, it's the feeling. This is where the polyvagal comes in. It's the sensation that you get in your body. And if you've had it, you know what I'm talking about. That's an indicator to you that there's a part here. When you have that pit in your stomach and your blood pressure starts to rise and your heart's racing and you feel like you have a weight on your chest and you feel like your throat is tight, that's when you know that that wound is about to be scratched and that part is showing up, right? So we've very high level covered for this first episode what internal family systems is, how it shows up, what this polyvagal is. Before we wrap up, because I'm going to take us to a second episode where we're going to pick one of these things and really deep dive. But before we do that, how does attachment theory play into this? What is it? And why should people have an understanding about it if dating right now is a challenge for them?
Yeah, attachment theory, it's definitely come into more prominence. You can see it all over Instagram now. I think most people that are into personal development, kind of understand it or at least see it. But attachment theory is really a framework where let me just say this. What I love about attachment theory is that when I first studied it for myself was about like, oh, I'm not alone. Because a lot of times, when we're going through these things and we're seeing these patterns that we can't interrupt, that we can't heal or whatever, you feel like very, very alone in this experience, especially when you have people around you that, my friends and family, I love them, but they were probably the least supportive people in my journey with finding like epic love. I'm in an amazing partnership right now. And it really just helped me see more about just a pattern that is actually pretty normal. So these different attachment styles are pretty much, everything that we've been talking about, which is the way that our minds and our bodies react to current relationship. And again, when we're talking about relationship, we can talk about a relationship that you're currently in. We can talk about dating. We can talk about with money. Like I used to have an anxious attachment style with money, for example, with job, with friendships. But it's this idea and this framework that the way that your body and your mind react actually make a lot of sense. And
would you say it makes a lot of sense based on the experiences that you had growing up?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Based
so
on
they're normal reactions to an abnormal circumstance, probably.
Yeah. Or what you just said, Stacey, which is like most of us, at least at this point, we had a childhood where, at least this was me, I had a childhood where there was a roof over my head and I had food to eat. But the emotional nurturing that I needed to become an adult, to have emotional intelligence, to learn how to set boundaries, to learn to listen to my intuition, all of those things that we're talking about. It wasn't modeled and it wasn't fostered. And so these different parts of me started to form, which, we've talked about today, which is like, it's actually very normal. And, we're made up actually of thousands of different parts, which is kind of crazy. And each part has a different motivation, a different environment that they live in. It's mind blowing when you really start to dive into it, because it starts to make a lot of sense. So the the attachment styles are formed. The studies have been, they're formed when we're, in the younger stages, the earlier stages of our lives. And I think my theory to go along with that is really, it's just a part. Like, I'm really, really big on parts work, obviously, but it's really just a part. Like, an anxious attachment style isn't a label that I want to carry, but I will say that a part of me is anxiously attached, right? Mm-hmm. Or avoidant, which is more of a protective, like crawl up in your shell type of vibe. That was me. That was my go-to. That's really just a part of me trying to protect me from any pain or hurt or not feeling enough or belonging or anything like that. So I kind of think attachment styles have really kind of had their day. I think, because it's just about a disorganized attached part. Like, I love you, I hate you, I want you, go away, because of fear of pain. Or in my, like I always used to say, like my wounds, my core wounds feel like that they're going to die, basically. And I know it's not me now, it's a part of me because of the work that I've done on myself. But yeah, that's kind of where I am with that.
I love it. So guys, we've covered some very high level, complicated terminologies today. And I purposefully did that because it's a big concept and there's a lot to unpack. And so when I met with Lilli initially, we talked about doing more than one episode here. So this is really going to be a series on dating and understanding, why am I so stuck in dating? Why am I so stuck in relationships? Why am I, quote unquote, not picking the right guy? Mm-hmm. Why is my picker broken? So this is kind of just a primer into another episode that we're going to do. And we're going to pick the topic, or we're going to go off site and pick a topic that we think we want to just spend like maybe 20 minutes diving into deeper. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you're just curious, like if we've piqued your interest and you've been stuck in relationship, and it doesn't have to be in dating. It could be with yourself. It could be, like I mentioned before, with a sibling, a parent, a good friend. I strongly encourage you to save this, share this episode with someone, but then look for the next episode with Lilli. Once that episode is released, we will put the link into the show notes so you can easily find it. I really want to thank you for coming on and giving us this high-level primer today, Lilli.
Thank you. Yeah. I also wanted to plug too, if any of this connected, it'll make a lot more sense. I have a feminine dating archetype quiz, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but I definitely want to plug this for this first one. And it goes through, it's a 2-minute quiz. It'll show you, again, whether you are in a relationship or whether you're dating, it'll show you your blocks to love and help you find your true love match, or the next thing that you need to do to heal. And there's 4 feminine dating archetypes. You can take that quiz at datingarchetype.com, and it'll spit out what your match is and then kind of show you, like I said, what your next steps are.
I love it. And that will obviously be in the show notes as well. So guys, you're going to want to check her out. Check out the links in the show notes, the link to her socials there, the link to her websites there, the link to the quizzes there. And you're going to want to stay tuned for my next episode with Lilli. If you guys like this episode, I strongly encourage you to subscribe. I drop a new podcast every single week. It's at flipyourmindset.com, wherever you listen to your casts. Until then, have a great day.